information to really say that that is the case to me. But I don't rule it out.
Well, there's definitely something there and something worth looking into. There, I mean, it's a huge area, and again, Daniels, we have done these programs with you and with others as well that has talked a little bit more about the Palladian Rite specifically. Picture starts to emerge definitely here that something has definitely to do with Palladia and the importance of Palladia. So it's a huge area. The question then is if we should jump upon the Genesis story here straight away, or is there something more you want to touch upon when we're talking about the Etruscans or the background story to this?
No, I think that people could look into that for themselves, because that's a huge section of history. I mean, Greek mythology is vast. I mean, one other example of another detail surrounding Pallas is that her father is a guy called Lycon.
Mm.
And it's actually from this character in mythology that we have the start of the whole werewolf idea.
Okay.
And recent films have popularized this, that the vampire race have created another race to be their slaves that they call the Lycans.
Yes.
The werewolves. And this does come from Greek mythology, with this king who was supposedly doing sacrifices to Zeus. And Zeus was unhappy with the sacrifice, and so turned him into a wolf. So this is the first time in history we ever have talk of a werewolf, at least in kind of Western history,
Yeah, interesting.
It comes from the father of Pallas. But yeah, this is just one example of the amount of connections that there are. And I mean, Lycon is supposedly, he had 50 sons. So again, this is so big, it doesn't really do it justice for me to lay it out. I can talk about some of the things which seem to connect.
Mm.
Really, for those sort of things with mythology, it's best for people to go and look at it themselves.
Absolutely. Is there anything specific you'd like to recommend? Where would be a good source to begin looking into some of this?
Sure. I mean, all of this information is online now. I mean, you've got sacredtext.com and many others that you can go to straight from the Roman and the Greek philosophers talking about all of these mythologies.
Yeah.
So there's many places, and I wouldn't really recommend one over the other, because many are interpreted or differently translated as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have to read a lot to really get an oversight over all of it anyway.
That's the idea, definitely. Okay, so Genesis, the beginning of one version of our background or history of our roots. Lead us into this topic a little bit, Dan.
Absolutely. Well, this was, again, because of trying to understand Bath and trying to use John Wood as one of its sort of main components to understand the ideas that went into his buildings. Wood also placed importance upon the Temple of Solomon, but following in the kind of the Christian or Christianized philosophical view, he believed that the classical orders of columns from ancient Greece originally came from the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah.
So this is something which people, I don't think, have been told or they're aware of. There's all the ideas about ancient Greece going through to Etrusca, but the ideas of the Jewish or the Hebrewic connection to classical architecture is something which not many people are aware of.
No, it's I never heard of it in that context actually.
Yeah, it's really strange. And so, with Wood placing so much importance on the Temple of Solomon, I wanted to go into why he felt this. So, the reference for people who want to find out about that, they could look at, I think that it is online, you can look for the book, The Origins of Building and the Plagiarism of the Heathens, by John Wood.
Oh, cool. All right.
Which I've mentioned before, which is one of his main works that he wrote about, as the title says, The Origins of Building as he saw it.
Okay, yeah.
And in that he refers to the works of Josephus and other Judaic historians who talk often about what Josephus calls, anyway, he's one example of what he calls the sons of Seth.
Yes.
In particular, the pillars of the sons of Seth. And this comes from the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus. And he writes that the pillars of the sons of Seth were two columns or pillars, one made of brick and one made of one piece of stone, solid stone. And that they were built so that if the world went through a deluge or through a trial of fire, that one or the other would survive.
That is fascinating.
These columns were meant to be absolutely covered in mathematical knowledge,
Okay.
symbolic knowledge, geometric knowledge, and astronomical knowledge. And we have some obviously big overlaps going on there, straight from the offset of two pillars, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm running into Freemasonry.
Jachin and Boaz.
There's Jachim and Boaz, you know.
Yes.
And obviously the idea which Ralph Ellis has been coming forward now with, and the alternative views of Jesus and the rest of the group that we would associate with early Christianity. He makes the idea that Josephus is St. Paul.
Yes.
And so that's a whole can of worms there. That's a huge one.
Yes.
So we've got possibly St. Paul talking about these two columns, which then go on to be very important within various mystery schools and notably Freemasonry, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So in order to understand more about what Josephus meant, because he doesn't really write a huge amount about it, all of the references that come from scholars, they just make a sort of glancing point about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really go into it. So you have to go back then to the biblical account to see, you know, who Seth was. It's a name which everybody would know would be a biblical name. And most people, you know, are aware of it. It's not kind of out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
But what people aren't aware of a lot of the time is of the first 5 people in the narrative of the Bible.
Mm.
He's the one that people aren't aware of, you know. It's very, very strange. You know, you've got Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Cain and Abel. And then Seth. Seth is the third son.
The third son, yes.
Yeah. But it's very interesting, you know, if you're to take it literally, there's only 5 people on earth, and all of Western culture has been permeated with Christian ideology and myths. You know, most of us know the stories from the Old Testament. And but yet people know so little about the 5th character.
That is very true.
The beginning of the world.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that is very interesting in itself, that people focus on Cain and Abel. And so the general outline of it is that Adam and Eve are created. They get moved out of the Garden of Paradise after eating from the tree. Immediately, Adam knows his wife. This is the way the Bible would recount it. And Cain is born.
Yes.
So then, after some time after that, Abel is born. So you have the 2 first sons of Adam. Then the story which everybody knows is of Cain and Abel both being asked by God to offer a sacrifice.
Mm.
And Cain, again, this all comes from chapter 4 of Genesis. Anybody can go back and look at this.
Mm.
That Cain is known for tilling the land and working as a farmer. And that Abel is known as a shepherd. And so the 2 sacrifices, one is a sacrifice of the first animals of Abel's flock, and Cain brings an offering from the land. And it's very interesting, you know, that this God who's meant to be the omnipotent, loving God associated with Christianity takes such a disliking to one of the offerings that he refuses to take it. You know?
Yes, yes.
I find that fascinating. I think there's a real stream of ideas that's coming through there that obviously isn't necessarily divine.
You want
but is attributed to a God, you know.
Yes, he wants the flesh and the blood, as it were.
It seems to be. Says, give me an offering, you know, and it's not like, oh well, yeah, that's from the land. You know, he condemns Cain for it, and so Cain becomes broken down in spirit and eventually decides to take Abel out to the field to tell him that he's going to show him something, and hits him over the head with a rock and kills him. So we have the first murder on earth on the biblical tradition.
Didn't take long, did it?
It doesn't, does it?
Jeez, yeah.
seeing this, marks Cain and kicks him out of the Holy Land. So they're no longer in the Garden of Paradise, but they are in the Holy Land surrounding the garden, the paradise that is Eden, you know. And so the reason that God marks Cain is that Cain is terrified that he's going to be killed by the other people.
Yes, there's more out there. That's interesting.
So there's obviously more out there. So again, the rabbinical translation or understanding of these first figures is that they're less people as they are whole groups of people, almost civilizations, you know.
Yeah.
And so Cain is marked with a certain mark so that none of the other people out there will kill him. And he leaves, and he goes and he founds the first city. And of course, again, you can't found a city of one person. So the first city comes up under Cain. After around 80 years or thereabouts, it's kind of sketchy, the account that he gives of the timeline. Adam and Eve, again, sit down together, lay down together, and Seth is produced.
Yes.
And Seth is supposedly, or as known again through the Christian or the Judaic translation, is appointed. The name Seth means appointed.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into it that Eve believed that Seth had been appointed to her after Abel had been killed. So there was already this importance placed upon Seth as God being more involved with Seth than he was with Cain and Abel.
Oh, I see.
Because he's seen as somehow more divine.
Mm.
So that's interesting straight off the bat. But then the importance of Seth is that all of the Canaanites, the people who come from the line of Cain, are supposedly wiped out after the flood.
Mm.
So the only people left are the people from the other side of the family tree of Adam, you know, who are all of the sons of Seth. Again, as Josephus was talking about, Josephus refers to them as a more divine, special group of people who are the elect, who are spiritually and ergonomically, he says they're actually larger, that they're an elect of people.
Do you think any of the giant or even Nephilim think is involved in this?
It seems to be, but it seems to be flipped around the other way.
Hmm.
So, and that's an interesting point, is that it's usually the Canaanites, the Philistines, and these groups who are considered the giants.
Yes.
And the Israelites, who again, as the rabbis would tell you, come from the line of Seth and Noah. They're not giants because the Philistines and the Canaanites look like giants compared to them.
Yes.
But this is something which has been brought forward, a concept by Joseph Farrell. He's one of the only people who I've heard actually mention it. Is just in mainstream history, or mixing between biblical history and actual history, we have the Jewish people, or the Hebrews, being taken into captivity by the Babylonians and by the Egyptians, by both of the what we call legacy civilizations of modern society.
Right.
And at both points, when the Jews come into contact with them, it pretty much signals the end of the civilization, you know. So Farrell brings up the point that he's not really sure, he's still playing with ideas, but that it may be that they were actually sent there to do this. That these were a group of people who were sent, they weren't so much sent into captivity, but that sent into an area which was developing in order to take down that civilization.
Uh-huh.
I find that a very interesting point, especially coming from a Christian.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of other ideas surrounding the Hebrews and the early Hebrews and who they were, coming from all the scholars that have been around up till now, and some of the newer ideas.
Yes.
But again, to get back to Seth, Seth, as we've noted,